Starting off, though, we have to talk about the shocking finish of the Timberwolves, not just beating the Nuggets to take a 2-0 series lead, but absolutely tearing them apart with their dominant win last night. They end up winning 106-80. That was the least amount of points that the Nuggets have scored all season long, and the Timberwolves did so without even their defensive anchor of Rudy Gobert. So this was a very surprising result in my eyes after dropping game one in Denver. It seemed like this was going to be a prime spot, especially given the fact that Gobert is not out with an injury, but he was present for the birth of his son, so he wasn't able to participate in this game, and this felt like a nice spot for them to sort of respond, and they did quite the opposite. This was the most human I think we have seen Nikola Jokic in this past, call it a 2-year stretch, where he just looked so uncomfortable, and he did look, I guess, slightly more comfortable if you at least look at the box score in game one, but, at the same time, still did not look to fully be himself, had 7 turnovers in that game, had another 4 in this game, making 11 in the first 2 games of the series, scored just 16 points on 5 of 13 from the field. He was blocked 4 times in this game, which is something that definitely stood out to me. The fact that they were meeting him with, typically, when we watch Nikola Jokic play basketball, in large part for him, obviously, he prefers to get his teammates involved, have it be more of a team-oriented game and not have to be the, focal point of the offense from a scoring perspective necessarily. And he was trying to be a little bit more aggressive in this game, working himself into the paint with Rudy Gobert out. And Naz Reid blocked him twice in one possession. Mike Conley got to Jokic at one point off of some help defense. So it was, a really rough game for Jokic. And again, these turnovers, they're just sloppy decisions here at times and just not careful with the ball himself. So obviously Jokic, he still rounds out his stat line to be solid, where scores 16 points, grabs 16 rebounds, and dishes out 8 assists. So, again, this is just the fact that he looks human. He looks mortal, and really, it's just the size of Minnesota has been such a disruptor for the type of game that he wants to play. And Jokic obviously isn't the only one struggling in this series. Jamal Murray was just straight up in jail last night, where he could not get anything going, and concerns are definitely rising about him some. He scored 8 points on 3 of 18 from the field, 4 turnovers to his 2 assists, and he hasn't really looked right all playoffs long. Now, he had the couple buzzer beaters against the Lakers, or game winners, I should call it. One of them was an official buzzer beater, but for Murray, it just seems like he's definitely not fully comfortable. And yes, of course, he's dealing with the calf injury from the Lakers series, but I feel like this series, it's not even so much about him not being 100%. It's just the type of defense that Minnesota plays with the amount of length that they can throw at him is just totally taking him off of his spot. And this is a Nuggets team that doesn't necessarily have sort of those secondary players to help contribute. And that being said, Michael Porter Jr. was, of course, incredible in that Lakers series, averaging 22, 23 points per game as a third option. But when it comes down to this Nuggets offense, it really does sort of rely on Murray to also be there. And he's shooting just 38-29 shooting splits in the postseason so far. And last night was the worst of them yet, where it wasn't just the level of production from him, but it was his demeanor, where there was a point he was just, it almost looked like he was just fed up with even trying to be an aggressor. He got Karl Anthony Towns switched out on the perimeter. Aaron Gordon was looking to swing it back to him. He had one of those Minnesota wings, but either Jaden McDaniels or Nickeil Alexander-Walker on him, and he was looking to give it back to Jamal, who should have at least, the speed advantage and be able to work Karl Anthony Towns on the perimeter, and Murray just sort of waved him off. And forced Aaron Gordon to take a tough drive. He ends up missing the layup, but it was definitely a moment that stood out to me. And, for Murray, again, his demeanor was just terrible. He spent the majority of the game arguing with the referees. He was at one point yelling over to the announcers, trying to sort of make sense of how this game was playing out. And it was definitely a physical game. The refs were letting a lot slide. That did definitely benefit the Nuggets to some degree, with Murray and his constant talking, as well as Mike Malone getting right in the face of one of the referees after that Anthony Edwards drive that saw Kentavious Caldwell-Pope end up going down. Looked like he might have gotten kneed in the groin there. But Murray was just kind of unhinged last night, and it was further displayed when he ends up throwing a heat pack onto the court from the sideline, from the bench that is. And we'll see how this plays out. I feel like it's going to at least be a fine, but Murray could potentially be facing a suspension in Game 3, and just such a crucial point where they really can't afford that at this time. And it was just a disaster for the Nuggets all night long. He and Jokic combined for 8 of Denver's 16 turnovers. The Nuggets had just as many turnovers as they did assists, which is just so uncharacteristic for this Nuggets team that has been on an incredible run the past couple seasons. And I guess you could say the Nuggets haven't necessarily had to deal with too much adversity in these past couple years. I think it's pretty clear that the Timberwolves are the best team. This year's version of the Timberwolves are the best team the Nuggets have had to face in the postseason the past couple years. And they, of course, played the Timberwolves in the playoffs last year, but it was a year younger of Anthony Edwards. He wasn't quite as refined as he is. They were still working on their chemistry with the double big situation of Towns and Gobert. There was definitely less maturity with Towns. Kyle Anderson and Gobert were fighting leading into the playoffs. They had no Jaden McDaniels, so it was all kind of a mess for Minnesota headed into the playoffs last year. And now they are definitely back with vengeance. And, for them to have a chance to redeem themselves after a disappointing Game 1 loss and respond like this just shows that they are currently uncomfortable with the idea of playing through adversity. And, let alone the fact that they had this opportunity without one of the Timberwolves starters and most important defensive player, just shows, I feel like you could maybe actually debate a little bit. I think Gobert is the most impactful, but Jaden McDaniels has shown that even when his offense isn't clicking necessarily, he is such an impactful player for them on that defensive side of the ball. And we're going to get into the Timberwolves a little bit more here as we go on. But on the side of the Nuggets here, like I mentioned, Malone was pretty unhinged as well and wasn't able to keep his composure. The fact that he didn't even get a technical for getting up in the referee's space like that, you could say the refs sort of were very lenient with the way that the Nuggets were playing this game and sort of gave them an opportunity to, steal this game back. But they were in their own heads. They were not checked into the game, and ultimately it wasn't even close for them. It seemed like they had no real pride, and I do wonder if part of this could have to do with the fact that this Gobert factor almost played into the Timberwolves' hands, where they were looking to make their adjustments on a couple days rest. They thought of some different ways that they could potentially attack Minnesota's defense, and then all of a sudden he is ruled out at game time. And I'm definitely not trying to make any excuses, just talking this out here. You saw Jokic, when you talk about the sloppiness with him, it was in the first couple minutes of the game where Kyle Anderson was starting in place of Gobert. Timberwolves decided to go a little bit smaller, and Jokic went to post up Kyle Anderson, and he just poked it straight out of Jokic's hands, which led to a transition opportunity for the Timberwolves. Timberwolves have been a team that has been really good at scoring off of other teams' turnovers, and last night was another example of this. And Again, no excuses for the Nuggets. You have to take advantage of that, but I do wonder if there was a sort of coaching element of this game where they were trying to adjust to something that wasn't necessarily there. And when Minnesota, I mean, they play very different when they don't have Gobert and they have to go a little bit smaller. Now, there are times they still balance the Naz Reid and Karl Anthony Towns defensive lineups, but it's just interesting. Offensively on the other end as well, they are able to space the ball out more, space the floor out more, I should say, and ultimately, just none of it was working for the Nuggets in this game. And the fact that Gobert wasn't in this game and the Timberwolves were still so dominant did have me thinking a little bit. And obviously, Timberwolves are focused on this season right now, finishing out the playoffs here. We saw their championship odds really jump. They are now the second favorites in terms of NBA Finals champion odds on DraftKings. They are now plus 320, only behind the Boston Celtics, obviously number one in the Western Conference. And in terms of a series perspective here, they are now minus 525 to close out the Nuggets in this one, which is just crazy the way that this has shifted in the past few days. But I did, again, just want to very briefly go over this thought experiment of what do the Timberwolves look like long term. We obviously know that Anthony Edwards, just 22 years old, he is the building block. He's making his argument for being a top 5 player in the league, potentially being the face of the league in the years to come. So they have him, Karl Anthony Towns, and Jaden McDaniels all locked down for the next handful of seasons. They have Mike Conley, who's going to be an expiring free agent after this year. Or he is an expiring free agent, so he's going to be on the open market come this offseason. I feel like Conley would be sort of willing to play ball a little bit and allow himself to make maybe a little bit slightly under market value as long as the Timberwolves do still pay him. And the Timberwolves do have the money to, so, lock him up for another couple years. Again, we'll see there. I do feel like he's sort of an underrated piece to this Timberwolves team. But I really wanted to sort of talk about the conversation surrounding Gobert and Naz Reid, where they both have player options entering the 2025-26 season. And Naz Reid is absolutely going to decline that in my eyes, and I know that that's probably not something that Timberwolves fans want to hear because of the fact that Naz Reid is such a hometown favorite. But he is making just under $13 million this year. He'll be making just under $14 in 2024-25. This is the now, of course, named the Sixth Man of the Year. He is going to want to get some more money than what he's currently making. Gobert is going to be a little bit more of an interesting conversation because at that point he'll be something along 34 years old. Is he going to be able to? I would imagine he probably declines that as well, as long as he's still the caliber of defender he is or close to it. He has a chance to make $46.6 million in the 25-26 season, but I say all of this to lay out the fact that, we've seen this Timberwolves defense become an absolutely elite group, the best in the NBA, and Karl Anthony Towns, the whole reason they sort of brought Gobert in the first place is because Towns was not a great defender, and he showed that he is very capable of it last night, and in general, through the course of the year, it feels like he is more competitive. Or more committed, I should say, on that defensive end. Now, fouls, definitely still an issue with him, but ultimately, I do think that they could also sort of run this forward here with Naz Reid instead of Rudy Gobert if they want to sort of cut down on some money in that instance. And the future is absolutely bright for the Timberwolves. I'm not breaking any news here, but when you talk about the idea of this being a team that is going nowhere, I definitely feel like they are in an incredible position moving forward with or without Rudy Gobert. And we saw how even without him last night, they didn't lose their identity. They know who they are. They are just so connected on that defensive end. And then, of course, they have the offensive star in Anthony Edwards. And Karl-Anthony Towns has also been incredible through these first 2 games as well. The 2 of them both scored 27 points last night. And again, just the reason I bring all of this up is to talk about the idea of the longevity of this group and the core that they have. Rudy Gobert was the piece that was sort of supposed to be inserted into to give them championship aspirations, and that has worked. But it feels like their window should last so much longer than just Gobert's contract with this team. So I think that as much as they gave up, you can definitely argue. I think it's getting harder and harder by the day to argue that the Timberwolves gave up too much for Rudy Gobert. It was an absolutely massive haul in order to get him, but if they get at least one championship out of this, it's hard to say. You can't say that it was a mistake. You can say it was maybe a little bit of an overpay, but at the same time, championships is what it's all about, and it seems like they are sort of knocking on the door of being in that realm. So wanted to just sort of run through that really quick. But other final thoughts here on the game. Definitely doesn't help the Nuggets that they don't have necessarily a second unit that has quite as much oomph to it in terms of being able to know exactly what their role is and slide into this situation and have success. Where, you know, there was a pretty awesome moment of the Peyton Watson chase down block against Jaden McDaniels. But, you know, on the whole as a season, we have seen that the non-Jokic minutes haven't been very good for them. It has been an issue. But last night, I mean, their starting group was getting work too, which only makes things worse when it comes to that second unit because you don't have anybody that's going to come off the bench and necessarily lead the charge for them. Reggie Jackson is still dealing with this ankle foot injury as well. Justin Holiday was actually, you know, their third leading scorer last night off the bench. So I don't know, maybe they could find something there. He got red hot from 3, but a lot of those points sort of coming when the game was already over. And that's the thing is late in these first quarters, third quarters, when the bench units start to come in, it's not like Minnesota has the deepest bench in the world necessarily between Nickeil Alexander-Walker and Naz Reid, but they're both very impactful players that know exactly what they are supposed to do. And last night they had an impact undoubtedly. Final notes here. First quarter, Aaron Gordon was almost the leading scorer for the Nuggets. He scored 13 in that first quarter. Only player that topped that in the entire game was Nikola Jokic with 16. And early on, when this was a potential game, felt substantial. The fact that he was knocking down some threes, which would be huge for them. He was trying to take a little bit more advantage of a smaller Minnesota team, and it ultimately meant nothing. Gordon actually ended up with the lowest plus-minus on the Nuggets at -33, and just really was not impactful after that first quarter. And, you know, it was just a blowout from there. They gained the 20-point lead in the second quarter. It was hovering around the 30-point mark for a lot of the game. So it was the Timberwolves absolutely dominating this. I did want to briefly touch on this idea of a lot of people, and it feels like Suns fans specifically, are asking for apologies from everybody about the fact that they were swept in this series, and sort of the other side of the coin is, should we feel worse about the LA Lakers, the fact that the Nuggets, who have absolutely owned them the past couple years, are now in this type of a hole? I'm not really on board with the whole revisionist history 2 games into the next series. I feel like with the Suns on this side of the argument, I mean, the issue with the Suns is that no matter how good the Timberwolves are, the Suns had fatal flaws that were clear pretty much all year long, and that's what ended up hurting them in the postseason. The fact that they were so reliant on their starters, they did not have a bench, and things only got worse there, of course, when Grayson Allen went out with injury, but they also didn't really have the legs to close out games. They were the worst fourth quarter team in the league It seemed like they let a lot of these games against the Timberwolves get away from them in the third quarter. They're restricted so much from a financial standpoint. I'm not apologizing to Suns fans, and I'm sorry, but I feel like, again, if they were to have faced the Nuggets, do you really expect anything to have been much different? I don't personally. And, from the Lakers' perspective of this, I don't feel like they should be getting any more heat than when they lost to the Nuggets the first time around. I thought the Nuggets were objectively the better team. They were the better coach team. And I still don't think that they're bad. Everybody's acting like the fact that this happened shows that the Lakers, lost to this team that isn't that good, when the reality is they are the reigning champs. They spent the majority of the year as the second favorites to win the finals, and I'm still not ready to fully count them out. I know that the odds are very much stacked against them, and chances are that it is the Timberwolves closing this out, but, at the same time, I think they have the best player in the NBA in Nikola Jokic, who led the Nuggets to 2 3-1 comebacks in the 2020 playoffs. Now, that was during the bubble, so the Nuggets didn't have to go on the road. Now they're going to go and pretty much have to steal both games in Minnesota. Obviously, at least one of them, but you don't want to be in that 3-1 hole. Now, they have until Friday to sort of recollect themselves and get themselves together, but obviously, odds stacked against them. Like I mentioned, Wolves are now minus 525 favorites in opposition to the Nuggets being plus 400. So I definitely, you have to credit the Timberwolves. They are in prime position here to take this home, but it's not like it's this completely unprecedented waters that the home team could drop both of their first 2 games and end up winning the series. I know that in 2021, we saw the Clippers drop both of their games in LA and still able to win that series in 7. I know in 2017, I believe it was, the Boston Celtics lost the first 2 games to the Chicago Bulls, and they were able to pull off the comeback, won 4 straight games there. So odds are absolutely stacked against them, but I'm not ready to fully abandon the idea that the Nuggets could come back in this series. But let us know in the comments section what you feel on this series, and any sort of big picture takeaways from what you've seen in these first 2 games. But on that note, we are going to be taking our first break, and when we come back on the other end, I want to dive into the other playoff game we got from last night with the New York Knicks and Indiana Pacers. So stick with us, and we will be right back.